Inflation in Australia hits a 33-year high. The Murdochs dump a $40 billion merger plan for News Corp, and this Australia Day, many employees will be in the office working. It's Thursday, the 26th of January, 2023, Australia Day. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. We're in the office working today.
Yes, but we're also in the office every day. Working.
Not always Sundays. Sometimes we have Sundays off.
Sometimes when you allow me off. Allow me off. I don't think that's a saying.
Okay, so there's a misnomer here. Let's clear something up. Who runs the show here? It ain't me, and it ain't Adam Lang. It's the producer, the person who puts it all together. One Michael Thompson, the local unit.
The local unit. I was waiting for that to come back in. And
that's him, putting it all together.
And look, there's been a bit of a buzz in the office the last couple of days because we talked last week about you picking up the nickname Checkout, as in self-serve checkout.
Let's clarify this. You giving me the nickname. Well, actually, one of our listeners giving me the nickname Checkout.
That's right. And I think that you were hopeful that it would just disappear, just waft away in the breeze and no one would remember it. And then we received an email from another listener who happened to say, I really enjoy listening to the daily podcast with the unit and Checkout. And I actually thought I could hear your heart break a little bit. That nickname has managed to survive.
Michael, as if you were ever going to let it go.
I really was. But now that clearly by popular demand, we can't.
So you've decided I'm Checkout and you have decided you're the local unit.
Doesn't seem very fair, does it? But I mean, you don't get to pick your nickname. It's just appointed.
Oh, you did. It seems. Anyway.
You're splitting hairs. Anyway, today, Sean, we've got a shorter show and no afternoon edition given the public holiday and the markets being closed. Then tomorrow we'll be back as normal. We do, though, have a really good interview today with AMP senior economist Diana Messina about yesterday's inflation figures. It is a cracker of a chat.
Yeah, it sure is. I mean, it's such a big story. We'll go into that in a moment. But Diana breaks it down for us. What's it mean in terms of price rises and, very importantly, what's it mean in terms of interest rate rises?
Yeah, and as always, I enjoy listening to anybody who's willing to make some definite predictions rather than just kind of talk generally about trends, to actually say this is what I think is going to happen. It's great. Something a little bit concrete.
Definitely. It's good.
All right. But inflation, Sean, is the main story this morning. Annual inflation hit a near 33-year high of 7.8% in the December quarter, below the Reserve Bank's forecast, but above economists' expectations. And that's convinced some market watchers that rates are rising again when the central bank's board meets in just 12 days' time.
Yes, it wasn't the number economists were hoping for. The headline 1.9% rise over the quarter was driven by big price increases in both domestic and international travel and accommodation, and a big and expected rise in electricity bills. The December quarter is expected to mark the peak in inflation. That's the good news. The bad news is that price rises remain very, very high. The annual increase was the highest since 1990. Now, the underlying rate of inflation came in at 6.9%, up from 6.1%. On a quarterly basis, it was 1.7%. Now, that's the highest quarterly level since the series began back in 2003. The underlying rate, or more correctly, trimmed mean, deletes the top 15% and bottom 15% of categories. So it's a better read on what's going on in the economy. And that 1.7%, certainly came in above expectations. Federal Treasurer Jim Chalmers says that while inflation is unacceptably high, he does believe it's peaked.
So rates are likely to rise, though, when the Reserve Bank board meets on February 6th?
Yes, it seems that's the most likely scenario. And yesterday, some economists who had been forecasting a pause in the rate cycle changed their mind on the back of the CPI figures. Diana Messina will talk to us about that. AMP didn't think there'd be another rate hike. Now they do. A 25 basis point hike is now broadly expected, particularly given the tone of the Reserve Bank's most recent commentary late last year. Yesterday, we said a good inflation reading would give the Reserve Bank a reason to pause, Michael. Well, we didn't get it.
No, not at all. How did markets react?
not well, with the S&P ASX 200 falling 0.5% immediately after the late morning announcement. It had been higher in earlier trading, but by the end of the day, closed down 0.3% to 7,468 points. Wasn't a huge amount going on, and volumes were down ahead of this holiday weekend period. Markets, of course, are closed today across the country. The banks were generally higher, the iron ore miners lower, and the retailers and Telstra were better as well. Golding and Newcrest fell back 2% after its recent strong run. Diversified miner South 32 was off more than 1%. Oil and gas giant Santos dropped 1.6%. Among the large caps, the best performer was James Hardie. It was up nearly 3%. Now, Michael, in the bond market, you love the bond market, don't you?
Yes.
Your heart's fluttering.
Could you hear that? Just like I heard your heart break when I used the term checkout, you heard mine flutter a little bit at the thought of bonds.
Bonds, yes. So investors reacted very quickly. Now, remember, this was a surprisingly high number. In fact, one senior economist called it absolutely shocking. That was Warren Hogan, who's been on our show previously. Anyway, the upshot of all that is bond yields jumped on expectations of further rises in interest rates. That means the market was sold off. Bonds were sold off, yields rose. Bond markets have now fully priced in a 9th straight rate rise at the Reserve Bank of Australia's policy meeting early next month. So futures trading in bond markets implies a 100% probability of a quarter point increase to 3.35%. Now, prior to yesterday's number, it was 70% probability. So that just goes to show how much that inflation figure from the Bureau of Statistics moved markets.
100% probability. That's reasonably certain.
It is. Mind you, it will come off, so it'll come down to 95% or something as we get closer. Anyway.
Okay. All right. What about international markets? What's happening?
Well, let's stick with the inflation figure. The Aussie dollar was probably the one local asset that benefited from the higher inflation figure and expectations of another rate rise. It pushed above 71 US cents, hitting its highest level in about 5 months. Now, if it gets through 71.36 US cents, it'll take it back to June 2022 levels. The local currency has rallied nearly 3 US cents this year, Michael, about 8 US cents since I travelled to New York.
There we are. Self-serve checkout, just squeezing in a little reference to his own international travel. You have lived up to expectations, Sean.
Thank you.
We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, sales of newly built homes fell by nearly 5% nationwide in the December quarter. That is the sharpest decline since the onset of the pandemic.
That was thanks to a fall in demand and rising interest rates, according to a new report from the Housing Industry Association. Now, sales in the fourth quarter last year were 42% lower than the same time a year earlier. Incredible. The slowing in sales will flow through to building activity, but it'll do even more than that. The building sector is a big employer, and it also has a significant multiplier effect. When you build a new home, you will end up buying new white goods, new carpet, new curtains, etc. So the pullback in the sector is really bad news for the economy. Rising interest rates has triggered a lack of access to finance, and it's largely been responsible for 20% of new home buyers cancelling contracts with builders. So think about that. You buy a home, you decide to renovate or you change things. So 1 in 5 people who have done that have now cancelled those contracts.
Wow, that's a really high number.
It's a huge number. The HIA says later this year a cut to interest rates might be necessary to avoid a downturn in the building industry. Maybe it's being hopeful in that, but still the numbers are quite stark.
I'm still blown away by that. And so that's 20% of new home buyers cancelling contracts. So they would lose deposits paid, etc.
Yeah, potentially, or they could cancel a contract or delay a contract. So maybe they'll do it at some point in the future. But yeah, wow. It's amazing.
Yeah, that is a really high number. Sean, the Murdochs, Rupert and Lachlan, that is, have pulled plans to merge the family's media assets worth around $40 billion after a group said it wants to buy the company's US digital real estate business.
Yes, Rupert and Lachlan announced a plan last year to recombine News Corp and Fox, but Yesterday, they released a statement saying the deal was off. Rupert Murdoch said they'd decided the deal wasn't optimal. Now, recently, a US company called Move approached News Corp to buy Realtor.com. That's the online property business owned by the media giant in the US. Now, News Corp actually owns 80% of it. REA.com.au here in Australia owns the other 20% of Realtor.com. It seems that deal, which would be measured in the billions of dollars, they picked up that asset for $1.2 billion a few years back. Seems that deal scuppered the idea of merging News and Fox.
Did you know that Realtor, I always thought that Realtor was you could use that to describe a real estate agent, but it is in fact a trademark in the US.
Is that right?
Yeah.
When I say Realtor, I think of Phil Dunphy from Modern Family.
That is a fantastic show.
Yeah, he is hilarious. He's hilarious.
Yeah,
the ultimate realtor.
Yeah, I just finished the what is it, 10 or 11 seasons of it. We managed to watch our whole way through it, and I don't think that show loses anything as you go through it.
Is that right? I mean, I've seen it on and off. In fact, it's the show that you watch on planes. So whenever I get onto a plane, that's kind of what I watch.
Yeah, and you can kind of pick it up wherever you want and just kind of and watch from there. I know you and I don't always agree on TV shows and films and things, but I think that this might be one that we actually do agree on. Now, Sean, this Australia Day, more than most, it seems to be about kind of who is working and who isn't, and that's kind of in both business and in government.
Yes, that's right. The Federal Finance Department yesterday sent out a memo to staff saying they can substitute a gazetted public holiday for an alternate day off. Now, it didn't mention Australia Day, but the timing was pretty obvious. In the corporate world, Telstra boss Vicky Brady, National Australia Bank Chief Executive Ross McEwen, and REA Group's Owen Wilson are all working today. Ms. Brady said Australia Day on January 26 is a painful reminder of discrimination and exclusion for many Indigenous Australians. She said it felt right for her to swap out Australia Day for another day. Now, companies allowing staff to swap Australia Day for a different day off include Medibank, Channel 10, Transurban, REA, Telstra, Woodside Energy and Canva. The big four consulting firms will let staff take the public holiday when they wish as well, as do most of the top corporate law firms.
And Sean, it seems appropriate that on Australia Day we're talking about Jim Molan, senior soldier and Liberal senator, who was farewelled yesterday after dying from cancer, aged 72.
The retired Major General's casket was draped in the military flag and he received military honours as family, friends and colleagues paid their respects. Governor General David Hurley, former Prime Ministers Tony Abbott and Scott Morrison, Opposition Leader Peter Dutton and other senior Liberal figures were among the mourners. Around 22 of the senator's former military classmates gathered at the funeral, while many more of the surviving 35 watched proceedings online. Molan's 40-year military career included deployments to countries including Papua New Guinea, East Timor and Iraq. He was elected to the Senate in 2017 before being defeated at the 2019 general election, returning months later to fill a casual vacancy. Now, Molan was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer in 2021 and took leave from Parliament for treatment. He died last week.
All right, our condolences to his family. Up next, Sean, is the Fear and Greed daily interview with Diana Messina, senior economist at AMP, about yesterday's inflation figures.
Yes, inflation, but we also talk about house prices, whether we're going to have a recession, all sorts of things. Well worth a listen.
Yes, it certainly is. It's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. And if you're looking for something else to listen to today as well, if you've got a bit of free time on your hands, then why not have a listen to the latest episode of How Do They Afford That, which is our sister podcast that really is about making your money work a little bit harder for you. This week's episode is all about emergency money, basically how much money you need tucked away in the case of an emergency. And unfortunately, it's typically quite a high figure. I did try and get Canna Campbell to put a dollar figure on it, and we do get pretty close to it. So it's worth a listen. You can find How Do They Afford That wherever you listen to podcasts, and we'll put a link in today's show notes as well. I know what you will be doing today, Sean.
I will be listening to How Do They Afford That. Well, that's not true. I've already listened to it. I'm not going to listen to it again. Sorry, mate.
Why not?
Okay, I will.
Thank you. And tomorrow I will test you on things that you will have only noticed if you have listened to it twice.
Right.
It's Thursday, the 26th of January, 2023. Make sure you're following the podcast and join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.